This isn't a daycare, Ms. Harris. We don't want that kind of energy here." The words rang out across the marble hallway like a slap across Carmen's face. The Monarch Tower, 85th floor, where every polished tile cost more than her monthly wage and nothing was ever out of place. And she had always known her role in this polished, machine-clean, step-aside vanish. But today she brought Lily. Her 5-year-old daughter, skin a warm bronze hair braided into neat, tiny rows, sat curled on a velvet-upholstered chair tucked into the hallway corner. Lily clutched her teddy bear brownie close to her chest, eyes fixed on the two adults nearby, silent and still, as though she instinctively understood she wasn't meant to be part of this world. Preston Vance stood in front of Carmen White, well-groomed, his tailored suit, as sharp as his tone. His eyes carried that familiar strain of polite contempt, the kind that smiled while drawing boundaries. "I already told you," he said, voice low, "but unyielding residents here pay a premium to live in a curated environment. When you bring outside variables into that, it disrupts the balance." Carmen held her breath, keeping her voice calm. "Mr. Vance, her school is closed this week. I had no other choice. She's just sitting quietly. She's not bothering." "Her presence is the bother," he snapped. "You people never get that." She froze. "You people." Two words that sliced deep, bloodless, but scarring. The sunlight streaming through the tall end windows lit up the tight curls of her hair. She heard the soft ding of the elevator behind her, but didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew that sound too well, designer shoes, clicking lowered gazes whispered judgment as she passed. Drawing a long breath, she looked Preston squarely in the eyes. "Excuse me, what exactly do you mean by you people?" He smiled, that condescending curve of the lips reserved for those who'd missed some unwritten memo. "I mean people who come from different standards, different environments. It always starts the same. One day it's a child, next it's a boyfriend waiting in the lobby, then cousins asking for jobs. We've seen the pattern. It never fits." Still, Lily said nothing, but her grip on Brownie tightened. Carmen felt her chest tighten too, not because of Preston's words, but because of Lily's eyes. That quiet confusion, that early shame. The same look Carmen had once worn at that age, standing beside her own mother, a black housekeeper, who'd once been called a distraction to the guests by a hotel manager who never bothered to learn her name. "Preston," she said, using his first name deliberately, "now are you implying that because we're black, we're a threat to your building's image?" He shifted his weight slightly, still composed but less certain now. "I'm saying," he answered, "that cultural alignment matters. Residents want discretion, elegance, predictability. Your situation doesn't exactly scream that. Your situation, as though being a single black mother was a design flaw." Far down the hallway, an office door creaked open slightly. A man stood inside, unmoving, one hand tucked in his pocket, the other holding a black leather folder. No one noticed him. His presence made no sound. But Lily noticed. She looked up at him, at the face not filled with anger but exhaustion, a chill, quiet burden that sat heavy in his gaze, as if the weight of a world no one wanted had been resting on his shoulders far too long. Carmen didn't know he was there. Preston stepped in closer, lowered his voice, but not its bite. "Let me be blunt. This isn't the Bronx. This isn't East Flatbush. We run a luxury residence here, not a social experiment." Something in Carmen began to shake, not from fear, but from fury, from humiliation. Because her child, bright, kind, well-mannered, was being reduced to a disruption, a threat simply for existing in a space that was never built for her. And what broke her most was knowing this wasn't unique. That every day this system, cloaked in professionalism, found new ways to shame people like her for daring to exist with dignity. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice lower, steadier, you're not just enforcing policy. You're enforcing fear. And my daughter sees that. Lily still clung to Brownie, but her eyes stayed on the man in the office doorway. He hadn't moved, but something in his gaze had. Ethan Cole, the ghost of Wall Street, the man who owned the Monarch Tower and an empire worth $11 billion, had heard every word from the beginning. He said nothing. Not yet. Carmen turned to reach for her daughter. That was when Preston dropped his final line, soft as a needle. You should be grateful. People like you aren't supposed to get this close to the top floor. And just then, Ethan stepped forward into the light. Lily lifted her head. No one else turned, but she knew. Something was about to change. No one said a word when the man stepped into the light. Ethan Cole, the legendary CEO, owner of the Monarch Tower, a man who could make an entire board of directors tremble with just a look. No one, absolutely no one, had ever seen him come down to this floor without an appointment. No one imagined he would show up, for a little black girl and her mother. But he had been there since the beginning. And now he stepped forward. Lily still sat on the chair, hugging Brownie close, her wide eyes following the tall man in a slate-gray suit as cold as a Manhattan winter. Carmen felt her knees beginning to give way. Ethan didn't look at her, didn't look at Preston. He looked only at Lily, and his eyes weren't cold like in the newspapers, nor sharp like during investor meetings. They looked tired, like a man who had grown used to being seen as a symbol, but hadn't been seen as a human being in a very long time. Lily tilted her head. Then slowly she stood up. She stepped down from the velvet chair as if it were a playground she knew well. One hand still held Brownie. With the other, she reached into her coat pocket. Carmen almost called out to her, but Ethan had already stopped, slightly lowering his head. No intimidation. No words. Lily walked toward him, her small footsteps tapping lightly against the marble floor. The entire hallway was silent like a chapel. When she stood in front of him, she looked up and said in a voice sweet and slow, like a melting piece of candy, "You look sad. Mommy says sharing candy makes people nicer." And from her tiny hand, she offered him a red lollipop, a simple act. But it cut through the toxic air of the upper floors, which had always been dressed in silk words like prestige and cultural fit. Preston Vance stood frozen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Ethan Cole, the man he had only spoken to through email, stood there bowed ever so slightly and accepted a lollipop from a little black girl. "Thank you," Ethan said softly, like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to mean those two words. Lily nodded, smiled her first smile of the day, and returned to her seat. Carmen stood still, overwhelmed. She didn't quite understand what had just happened, only that her heart had been shattered and then gently stitched back together by her daughter's hands. Ethan looked at Preston. He didn't yell, didn't scold. He just looked. And that look, it was like glass cracking across a flawless window pane. "Mr. Vance," he said, "join me in my office." Now. His voice was calm. But to Preston, it might as well have been a death sentence wrapped in silk. Preston swallowed hard. "Sir, I now." Ethan turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. The lollipop remained in his hand, the most out-of-place object in this sterile world. Preston rushed to follow, sweat glistening on his forehead. Carmen stood frozen, unsure of what to do next, when she heard Ethan's voice once more. "Ms. Harris," he said, "please continue your work. And if Lily would like to wait in the library, there are picture books there." His tone wasn't commanding. It was an invitation, but one that carried the weight of justice. Carmen nodded, her throat tightening. Yes, sir. Thank you. Ethan gave a small nod and disappeared into his office, the door closing behind him, like the end of an era. Carmen turned to Lily, who was arranging her teddy bear as if preparing to carry him into the library. Mommy Lily whispered, Is he the boss? Carmen smiled faintly, wiping a tear from her cheek. Yeah, baby, he's the boss. Lily thought for a moment, then murmured, He didn't look like a bad guy. He looked like someone who needed a friend. The office door closed behind them with a sound so soft it was almost non-existent. But to Preston Vance it was the first blow in a long string of indictments yet to come. Ethan Cole's office overlooked the vast green canopy of Central Park, a quiet stretch of nature surrounded by glass and steel. But today, no view was soothing enough to cover the storm rising inside. Ethan stood beside the window wall, holding the red lollipop, the one object that didn't belong in this room. Preston stood behind him, throat-tight hands clasped behind his back, like a schoolboy caught cheating. Sit, Ethan said. Preston obeyed immediately, his complexion losing half a shade. Sir, I assure you I meant no disrespect. The policies, Ethan raised a hand, a silent gesture. But in that hand was still the lollipop evidence of innocence that had just disrupted an entire system. Tell me, Preston, Ethan said, his voice cool and even like tempered steel. What's your hiring protocol for service staff? Preston blinked. We prioritize professionalism, discretion, prior experience in high-end residential management. We want people who align with the building's culture. Culture, Ethan repeated. Define that. Preston swallowed hard. Clean appearance, proper communication, the ability to blend into what exactly? Ethan turned to face him, his eyes no longer blank but sharp as a scalpel. Preston shifted in his seat. Look, sir, it's not about race, it's about consistency. Residents expect a certain tone, a look, a standard. Ethan walked slowly to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick black folder. He placed it on the desk. Last week I asked Marcus, my chief operations officer, to audit your HR practices from the last 5 years. We've been getting complaints. Not formal, but enough to raise questions. Preston broke into a cold sweat. Complaints, Sir. Ethan opened the folder. Inside was a detailed report, 17 staff members fired or reassigned. 14 of them were Black or Latinx. The stated reasons in their records: cultural misalignment, communication style not a good fit. Ethan read each line like he was reading out charges. He wasn't shouting, but his silence was sharper than any raised voice. Explain this pattern, he said, eyes never leaving the data. Preston fumbled for the words he'd used to survive so many uncomfortable situations. Sir, I don't make decisions based on race. I make them based on performance and presence. There are expectations. Residents. They notice when someone doesn't belong. Belong. Ethan closed the folder gently. People like Carmen Harris. Do they not belong? The air in the room grew thick. Preston tried to answer. I only meant Ethan didn't let him finish. I've let you run this floor for 12 years, he said, his voice now low and rumbling like distant thunder. And in those 12 years, you've built a quiet system. Not with rules, with looks, with tones. With words like presentation, tone, too urban. Each word landed like a nail hammered into the coffin of polite hypocrisy. Mr. Cole, please, this is a misunderstanding. Ethan cut him off. You called a 5-year-old girl a disruption. You implied her mother was contaminating the space. Those weren't my words. Oh, but they were, Ethan snapped. Every word, every pause, every smile hides a sneer. I heard it all. Preston fell silent. Ethan glanced down at the lollipop on the desk. a symbol of innocence but also a dart that had pierced the mask of power. "Do you know what I saw today?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "I saw a mother holding on to her dignity while being humiliated. I saw a child who should have been playing in a park forced to witness the rotten machinery you've built." He stepped closer. His gaze now was the final blow. "And I saw something I hadn't seen in a very long time, Preston," he said quietly. "A spark of truth from a child offering kindness where this building had none." He turned away. "No more words needed. Marcus is finalizing a full report. You'll be hearing from HR and legal." Preston stood up, panicked. "Mr. Cole, I have a family. So does Carmen," Ethan said without looking back. "So did every person you erased with a smile and a form letter. Please, I can fix this. You can leave." Carmen stepped into the 85th floor office with her heart pounding against her chest. Not out of fear of Ethan Cole, but because she knew that every gaze, every prejudice, every life quietly erased over the years was walking into that room with her. Ethan sat behind his desk, face stern but not contemptuous. In front of him was an unwrapped red lollipop, the most innocent thing ever to exist in this space. Preston Vance stood near the window as if searching for an escape along the Manhattan skyline. "Ms. Harris," Ethan said, his voice low but clear. "Please have a seat." Carmen nodded and approached the chair across from him, the kind of chair usually reserved for attorneys, partners, and CEOs. A place never meant for someone like her. Preston tried to interject. "Mr. Cole, I don't think," "Don't," Ethan cut in, his eyes still fixed on Carmen. "This is her moment." Carmen swallowed the lump in her throat. Ethan leaned forward, both hands resting on the glass desk. "I wanted you here," he said, "because I believe you deserve to hear the truth directly from the man who built the system that harmed you. And so many like you." Preston's face drained of color. "That's unfair. This isn't some trial." "Actually, it is," Ethan replied, turning to him. "The kind you've never faced because your power always came with a door to hide behind." He nodded at Carmen. "Go ahead." She looked at Preston, her palms slick with sweat. But the gaze of the man across from her anchored her. Steady. Strong. She opened her mouth. Her voice trembled but did not break. "You never had to call me black. You never had to say I didn't belong. I felt it every time you walked past me without seeing me. Every time you introduced a new employee, blonde, blue-eyed, while I remained nameless, voiceless." She looked directly into Preston's eyes. "Every time you said cultural fit, I heard judgment. Every time you said professional tone, I knew you weren't talking about volume but about skin." Preston inhaled, ready to respond, but Ethan raised his hand, like pressing mute on a system that had been running far too long. Carmen continued, her voice firmer now. "I used to think that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet, caused no problems, I'd eventually be seen. But I wasn't seen. I endured, and Lily, my daughter, she should never have to grow up watching her mother be humiliated for simply existing on the top floor." No one spoke. The hum of the AC was the only sound between them and the truth now laid bare. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp like cut crystal. "Preston," he said slowly, "she's not the only one." He pressed a button on the desk. The door opened. Marcus, an Asian-American man, COO of the entire firm, entered, holding a thick file. "Full report," Marcus said. "Includes 5 years of data on hiring, terminations, performance reviews, and benefits." Ethan opened the file and began to read deliberately. "In the past 5 years, you've hired 43 operations staff. Only 5 were people of color. Of those, 4 were terminated within 18 months. The reasons listed fall into 3 familiar categories: not a good fit, attitude concerns, and appearance doesn't reflect the brand." Preston said nothing. His face was like a white linen tablecloth stained with black ink. In contrast, Ethan continued. White employees, even those with serious infractions, were transferred to other departments. Their average salary increased by 18% over 3 years. Carmen looked at Marcus. He gave a subtle nod, the kind of nod from someone who had faced prejudice but lived long enough to stand as witness. Ethan stared at Preston. What you built wasn't a hiring system. It was a filtration net, subtle, polished, and venomous as a snake's bite. You called it professional selection. I call it organized racism. Preston exploded, voice cracking. You think I'm the only one? Every building on this block does it. I did what everyone else does, Ethan nodded. I know. He stood and walked to the window, gazing down at Central Park, where Lily should have been playing tag, not listening to her mother be degraded on the 85th floor. But today in my building, it ends. He turned back. Preston Vance, you are terminated effective immediately. All access revoked. Your file has been handed to legal. Preston stumbled back. Ethan, please. This isn't just an internal issue. This is a cancer in the entire industry, and I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago, cut it open and let the light in. He looked at Carmen. For the first time in her life, she felt the gaze of someone powerful, not looking through her, but truly seeing her. Carmen, he said, I'd like to offer you the role of assistant operations manager. You know this building better than anyone, and I believe you can rebuild it not just with your hands, but with the integrity you've shown me today. Carmen opened her mouth, but no words came. Tears fell. Not from pain, but because a door that had been locked for a lifetime had just swung open. She nodded, choking back emotion. I don't know what to say. Don't, Ethan said gently with the faintest smile. Action is enough. Marcus nodded and stepped out. 2 security staff appeared outside the door without being called. Preston looked at Ethan one last time. You'll regret this. Ethan answered, his voice softer than the wind. Oh, I'll sleep better than ever. 6 months later, Carmen Harris walked across the marble lobby of the 85th floor with her head held high. Her black shoes weren't expensive, but every step was firm, confident, and carried weight. On her chest, a silver nameplate read, Carmen Harris, Assistant Property Manager. She still wore her natural curls pulled into a neat bun, gold hoop earrings glinting just beneath. Her outfit was modest business wear, crisply pressed. No designer blazer, no red-bottom heels, just the power of presence unbowed. Those who used to breeze past her without a glance now stopped to nod in greeting. Not because of her title, but because she had done what no one else dared, ripped the velvet drape off a silent system of exclusion and rebuilt it with integrity. In her new office next to the library, Carmen kept a small framed photo of her mother, a woman who'd worked 35 years in a laundry room in Queens. Beneath the photo, a handwritten note read, If you can't enter through the front door, change the locks. The Monarch Tower had changed too. It wasn't just about crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers, or marble floors anymore. It was about this, a black woman at the front desk whose name was never mispronounced. A Puerto Rican grandmother hired as a community guide for new residents and loved by all. An Indian American man now leading the tech department was recently profiled in the Times. Diversity wasn't a PR checkbox anymore. It was how quality was actually maintained. In the library where Lily once sat curled in a corner, she now read aloud to a circle of other residents' children. The butterfly didn't know she was beautiful until she saw how flowers turned when she flew past. She read, then turned to a blond boy beside her. Do you like butterflies? Only if they bring candy, he giggled. Lily pulled out a green lollipop from her pocket and offered it to him. A gesture repeated, But this time it didn't need adult witnesses to be magical. In the boardroom above, Ethan Cole reviewed the latest report. Resident satisfaction had increased by 37%. Applications to the operations team had tripled. 3 major publications listed the Monarch among 2025's landmark buildings for operational equity. Marcus entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Good numbers, he said. But the best part, no one's left because of cultural fit anymore. Ethan smiled. Funny, he said, how quickly things change when you stop calling prejudice standards. As for Preston Vance, terminated and under investigation for systemic discrimination, he vanished from Manhattan real estate. His name stopped appearing in Midtown boardrooms. His only legacy was a few HR forums citing him as a case study in structural arrogance. Carmen never mentioned him again. She didn't need to. One quiet Friday evening, as the building settled into stillness, Carmen took Lily up to the rooftop. The wind was strong. The city stretched out like a living map, a place where people like her had once been pushed to the basement, told they didn't belong. "Remember the first day?" Carmen asked, kneeling to tie Lily's shoe. The girl nodded. "Yeah." Mr. Ethan was sad. "You were scared. And Brownie was quiet." They both laughed. "Brownie's still quiet," Lily whispered. "But I'm not scared anymore." Carmen looked at her daughter, brown eyes just like her own, but brighter looking forward. And she knew this rooftop now had space for children like Lily. At the 1-year anniversary of the Monarch reform, Ethan Cole stood before the press and said, "Equity isn't a slogan. It's a new system built by those who were once kept outside the old one." He paused, glancing to the back of the room where Carmen stood with the operations team. And sometimes he continued it. All starts with a red lollipop, and a child brave enough to share it with someone the world thought needed nothing. After the ceremony, Lily ran to hug Ethan. She no longer called him the boss. Now she called him Uncle Ethan. "I brought your favorite," she shouted, pulling out a green apple lollipop. Ethan laughed, not the laugh of a CEO, but of a man who had rediscovered the human part of himself. He bent down, accepted the candy just like he had that very first day. And this time the entire building applauded. Carmen didn't seek revenge. She chose to transform. Lily didn't fight for power. She chose to share. And Ethan Cole, the man who once stood above the world, found his way back to solid ground, thanks to a little girl who saw sadness in his eyes. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe or carry a gavel. Sometimes it carries a candy, and a name you refused to learn until it was too powerful to ignore. Sometimes all it takes to break a broken system is someone brave enough to stand. And sometimes the thing that changes a powerful man forever is a small piece of candy from a child who sees more than the world ever did. If this story touched your heart, don't forget, to help spread a message of justice and compassion. Comment your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed an invisible system like this one? Subscribe to Toch Story to never miss the stories that move, inspire, and speak to what matters most. We're here to tell the stories the world needs to hear.